Hi friends, it's Joshua, and I want to share with you some news first, and then like a weird rambling conversation with myself second. First of all, there are card of the day videos up on Instagram. I've been producing a card of the day every day. That's sort of my New Year's resolution, is to return to that practice. And so you can find me on Instagram at JWM the same as all my other internet content, to see those videos. And it's a little free general reading that you can carry with you throughout your day. They're usually like spiritually inspiring or something like that. So that's just something that I'm offering. I'm also letting you know that I am going to start this month publishing videos about card reading, playing card reading, which is what I use primarily in my divination practice these days. So that's exciting. So stay tuned for that. Hit subscribe and like. I tend not to tell you to do that in my videos, and that's maybe a mistake because I have videos with like 500 views and like 2 people, subscribed. So it helps the channel, and it helps make it make sense for me to continue producing videos, because YouTube is not a great place to make a lot of money these days. And so small creators that only have a few videos up, it's really hard to get anywhere unless you have a really large following. So it helps the channel to subscribe. It helps to get likes. It makes it more sensical for me to make more content if you participate in the content. Actually, I want you to comment. I want you to ask questions. I want you to give constructive criticism. I'm totally open to all of that. This works better. Internet content creation works better when more people are participating. I'm not looking for people to listen and be like, okay, Joshua, I'm gonna do that. That's how I'll read cards from now on. Like, I don't want that. That's not a goal. So please ask questions, contribute your own thoughts. The way that I present things when it comes to teaching divination is very particular. It is very specific. And in my practice, I try to be careful to say, this is the way I do it. Other people have other ways of doing it, but I don't teach those ways. I am simultaneously very particular about how I do things, and very open to the reality that that's not the only way to do it. And that's, I feel like the New Age, which I don't really consider myself part of, but I feel like the New Age needs a little bit of that. I think in the New Age, there's this idea that like we do everything goes, but there is a nebulousness to that isn't good for people. So there's a nebulousness to that. What does that mean? I feel like people kind of use that as a spiritual shortcutting method. That's what it is. I mean, if I run into a roadblock over here, I just find something else to do, and I don't sit and really work through that roadblock. And that's what spiritual shortcutting is, essentially. So instead of like cherry picking from all these different traditions and like taking whatever you want from wherever you are, because you're probably a white person that doesn't, have any problem with that, pay attention to the tradition that you're in and the ways in which that challenges you, because those points of challenge might actually be an invitation into spiritual growth. And instead of jumping ship once you run into a problem and doing something else. Now, ironically, let's talk about what my spiritual life has been like for the past 5 years. Yes, I have gone back and forth a lot over the past 5 years between Judaism and Christianity, and have over the past year really found myself at home in Christianity and committed to that. It does not mean that I'm leaving behind the incredible wealth of information and wisdom that I have interacted with from the Jewish tradition, which was not my religion, but my peoplehood, my ethnicity, my identity. When a Jewish person joins a different religion, there is a tendency in modern Judaism to discount that person as Jewish. I disagree with that tendency. I think that Jewish identity is so much more than religion, and you carry it with you, especially into Christianity if you convert to Christianity, because it is so much of the roots and foundation upon which following Jesus is built. So I fully understand, very, very fully understand, why that is a controversial idea, and why that's difficult for a lot of Jewish people to hear. The fact that my ancestors recently escaped from genocide is not is not erased by me practicing a different religion. So that's where I'm coming from with that. I am aware of the history of persecution, Christians persecuting Jews, and so I'm not coming at this with any sort of illusions that this is going to be like easy for anyone to hear. However, it does bring up an interesting auxiliary problem and question, which is what do you do with divination? Because Judaism is much more open to divination than Christianity is. So what about that? That was a big question for me over the past few months, during which I actually stopped doing divination for a while. And when I stopped doing divination, I had this dream where God's self came to me in a dream and handed me three D6s, three six-sided dice. That's the geek term for six-sided dice, is a D6. That was a big wake-up call to the reality, and I've had spiritual experiences about this in the past, but we just repeat our spiritual lessons until we learn them. That was a big wake-up call to me to the reality that I was spurning my gifts. I was letting go of something that God had given to me. Like, divination is a spiritual gift that I have, and I'm not saying that to be boastful. I'm saying that because we need to acknowledge what our spiritual gifts are, and that is so clearly a huge part of my life, my spiritual practice personally, and also what I offer to the world. It's really it's half of my ministry. I have an official ministry. I work in a church. I am basically a youth minister, not ordained. And the other half of my ministry is through spiritual counseling, and that most often takes the form of card readings. And so that's something that I think was a wake-up call for me. And so I spent a little while in contemplation and prayer about that, because it's important to me, my direct experience with God, but like, I am a Christian, and so my direct experience of God also needs to make sense with my theological with my theology and with the Bible, more importantly. So those are the kind of the requirements for being a Christian. Like, Christianity is not only a direct experience with God. That's not like, you having a relationship with Jesus does not necessarily a Christian make you. You do actually have to have that relationship in the context of what's reasonably biblical. So that's something that's not really controversial to say. So I thought about it, and I've done a lot of thinking about this. I mean, I used to produce a podcast about Jewish witchcraft that talked about biblical justifications for lots of things that I no longer see as justified. But so I really wanted to be careful with that, because I'm good at justifying things that later on I'm like, oh, that's a little bit intellectually dishonest. I think it is intellectually dishonest to say that witchcraft is fine. That's from a biblical perspective. So that's not coming with judgment for people who practice witchcraft. It's saying, I have chosen to be in relationship with the Bible, so for me, that's not okay. That leads us to the question of, like, what about divination? Here's the thing. The Bible specifically commands the creation of a system of divination. In Exodus, it's called the Urim V'Tumim in Hebrew, or the lights and perfections is usually what it's called in English. I think that's a very beautiful turn of phrase, so I use that. And that system of divination was given to Moses on Mount Sinai by God, and God basically said, whenever the priesthood wants to consult with God, not everyone's a prophet, so some people need a physical object, an oracle, with which they can discern/divine the will of God. And this is used in many cases in the Bible to ask God questions. It's especially used by King David. He uses the Urim V'Tumim a lot, and he uses it to ask yes or no questions. Saul also uses it before him. But he also uses it to get really detailed descriptions of what's going to happen if blah, blah, blah. So it's clear to me that there is a biblical system of divination, and we don't know what it was and how it worked, but divination isn't the problem itself. So when the Bible prohibits certain types of divination, what's going on? What's that about? I think that has to do with one very simple question. Do you worship the God of Israel, and is your relationship with the God of Israel? For Jews and Christians, the answer should be yes. And that means that part of that relationship, part of the condition of that relationship that comes from God, that God says, if you want to be in relationship with me, this is what you have to do. Part of that is that it is an exclusive relationship. There's no other gods that can be involved in that. And in fact, we should even be really careful about other entities at all. Like, I totally understand and agree with, believe it or not, the Catholic perspective that Mary can intercede with us, that saints can intercede with us, that we as living human beings who will never die can intercede for each other. That is that's I get that. However, ultimately that all funnels up to God. That God has to be at the center and top, whichever way you want to, taxonomy the sort of the spiritual world. God has to be at the center of that. I like that better. God has to be at the center of that. And if God is not at the center of that, that is what makes it not okay for a Jew or Christian, in my opinion. And I think that's a pretty middle of the road mainline idea for Jews and Christians. Again, that's not with judgment for people who are not in that covenant relationship, because if you aren't in that covenant relationship, there's something different happening there. I could do a whole nother video about what I think is happening there, but it's none of my business, honestly. Like, it's none of my business. Your relationship with God is yours. But when it comes to Judaism and Christianity, when it comes to people who claim the Bible, those are the conditions of the relationship, the explicit conditions that God has to be at the center. That does not exclude divination. It excludes divination when that divination does not look to God for the answers. There's a verse in Proverbs. Oh, I'm not going to remember what it is right now, but it basically says the lot is cast into the lap, but the interpretation is God's. And Christian Bibles do a lot of weird mental gymnastics to be able to make that verse look like it's not about divining, about casting lots, but it's very clear in Hebrew that it is, and it uses like the typical word for lot and the typical word for an interpretation of the lot, which is mishpat. So a goral, a lot, is cast into the lap, but the mishpat belongs to God. And so basically, this deck of cards is a physical object that I can use as a tool. Whether or not it is okay to do that depends on where I am directing my attention. If my attention is on God, and if I have a relationship with God, and I'm in a covenantal relationship with God, and that is the relationship I rely on to do my card readings, fine. But if I'm doing readings and being like, oh, let's see what comes in from the universe, I feel like that is taking a step outside of the covenantal relationship that I have with God. So I feel like that gets our elephant out of the room, or I don't know, sacrifices the elephant or something. Elephants aren't kosher. We wouldn't sacrifice an elephant. But the point is that I think it is really vitally important to be clear about your theology when you are doing divination, which I think is a spiritual practice. And for me, it's important to state that so that folks know where I'm coming from. I do not want to be a source of confusion for Christians who are really interested in divination or have a really strong intuition, or their spiritual gift is the sight, or their spiritual gift is clairvoyance or clairaudience or whatever. They're going to be looking for you maybe are looking for a way to do that and to explore that is that meshes with your relationship with God. And it's going to be really hard for you to find that because the New Age just wants to gobble you up and pull you out of Christianity. And that's true. There are a lot of anti-Christian elements to the New Age world. And I think that's true of Judaism as well. It's really hard for Jewish people who have an intuitive gift to find a way to practice and develop their intuition that doesn't pull them out of Judaism and ask them to do things that don't really make sense with a Jewish religious life. So I want to be clear about my stance on these things so that I'm not participating in pulling people away from the faith where they belong and they have decided they belong. And the other side of it is that you should know where I'm coming from. Don't learn from people whose spiritual lives you know nothing about. Don't learn this spiritual craft from people who are not sharing what the spiritual sources that they're working with, because you don't know what those. If you don't know what those are, then you don't know what those are, and that's not a good place to be in. I think that the anything goes attitude of the New Age is dead. And it's so over. #over. Let's just get over that collectively. Know your sources. Know where your information is coming from in a literary way, but also in a spiritual way. I'll get off my soapbox. The rest of the videos will not be 15 minutes long, and they will also be a little bit more practical. This is not something I do well. talking about my spiritual feelings in a video because it's really hard for me to rein it in and keep it short. But we're going to get back to my forte, which is technical instruction, in a moment. But I felt like I needed to share that with you. It's sort of, it's my due diligence. So here it is. It's available. And I hope and pray that you will use this information for good.